At night the courthouse breathes different. Daylight makes it righteous, darkness makes it honest. The marble stops pretending to be noble and goes back to being cold. The flags droop. The portraits stop judging. You can hear the building's true heartbeat, compressor hum, elevator sighs, the faint rattle of a vent coughing up dust from trials nobody remembers. That's my hour. I clock in when the juries have scattered and the lawyers are back to rehearsing courage in bathroom mirrors across the city. I push a cart that squeaks like a confession and carry a ring of keys heavy enough to anchor a small boat. Mops, rags, citrus cleaner that could peel paint and pride. People call me the janitor when they bother to call me anything. I don't correct them. Invisible has its uses. My name is Mason Holt. 38. Shoulders that never quite uncoil. Hands with a permanent sting of bleach. The security guards nod at me the way you nod at a vending machine that's never eaten your dollar. The clerks leave their coffee cups like offerings to the god of cleanup and never look back to see if the god answers. The building is a cathedral to names that aren't mine, etched into bronze and stone. I learned long ago that you can walk through a temple every night and still not belong to the faith. Routine is a rope I've learned to climb and not hang from. I start in the basement, holding cells. The smell down there is metal and old choices. I sweep up the shelves of lives, paperwork corners, cigarette butts smuggled in God knows how, a shoelace someone wasn't allowed to keep. I move upward floor by floor, like a tide that only flows one way. There are things you see from the ground that nobody notices from a bench. How a bailiff's smile gets meaner with each shift. How the public defender's shoes wear out faster than his hope. How the judge with the white hair drinks his water the way some men drink whiskey, and how the prosecutor with the perfect part checks his reflection more than his facts. I don't judge. I inventory. It's a survival instinct when your life has no insurance policy but silence. Sometimes I read the case captions on abandoned files. Names like weather fronts rolling through, petitioner versus respondent, people versus whoever ran out of options. I never open anything sealed. I know better. But I pay attention to the margins. People leave their lives in the margins. A grocery list on the back of a motion to dismiss. A kindergarten drawing tucked into a subpoena. Once, a folded photo of a man with a bruise blooming under his eye, smiling like he didn't plan to let it matter. I keep small rituals. I eat dinner at 1:17 a.m. Always from the 4th floor vending machine, because the 3rd floor one tilts the candy bars forward like they're about to jump, but never lets them fall. I wipe the fingerprints from the glass doors, like erasing a day one swirl at a time. I pause in the law library, not because I belong there, but because the air tastes like paper ambition and I like the quiet. Every now and then, I trace sentences in books I can't afford. Habeas corpus. Prima facie. Words that feel like cogs in a machine too big to love any of us back. My mother used to tell me I was born older than I should have been. She worked nights, too, in a hospital that smelled like lemon and loss, and when she finally slept, she did it shallow, like a swimmer who knows the bottom is closer than it looks. She never had a story about my father that lasted the same way twice. Sometimes he was a guitar player. Sometimes a traveling salesman. Once, and only once, when the rent was late and her eyes were the color of the ashtray she cleaned, she said he had a suit that fit like a lie and a car that growled like a promise. Then she laughed at herself and said, "Forget it. Stories are just windows you throw rocks at when you want to hear glass." I learned early that men with answers are dangerous. So I made peace with questions. What I didn't make peace with was the way a life can shrink until you can catalog it on a cart. Mop, bucket, spray, rags, gloves. Some nights I whispered to the empty hallways, "Tell me something true." The building never answers, but it listens. I can feel it listening. On the nights when the moon sits like a coin above the rotunda skylight, I catch my reflection on the polished floor, a man bent over his own shadow. People think invisibility is a curse. It can be a shield. Nobody suspects the man who empties their trash knows how to repair a grandfather clock, or that he can pick a lock gently enough to leave pride intact, or that he can look at a ledger and hear the numbers hum off key. Nobody asks what you were before you became furniture. By 3, the city outside is thinned to sirens and delivery trucks. I make my way to the top floor. Judges' chambers. Carpets that drink the sound of footsteps. Bookshelves like centuries. Family photos angled just so, smiling futures that don't include me. I vacuum around the desk legs, careful not to nick the mahogany. I dust the frames. I do what I'm paid to do, leave no trace of the day behind. That night, the clock on the wall stuttered at 3:33 and kept going. A breeze rippled the corner of a legal pad, though no window was open. I told myself it was the vent kicking on. I told myself a lot of things. The building breathed, and I breathed with it, a foreigner who learned the local language by sweeping in circles. Something was changing. I didn't have the name for it yet, but I felt the floor tilt a fraction under my boots, as if the world had just shifted a degree, small enough to pretend you imagined it, big enough that everything rolling loose would eventually find a new edge and fall. The judge's office had its own kind of silence, different from the rest of the courthouse. It was padded, deliberate, the sort of silence men buy with money and power. The carpet drank my footsteps, and the shelves stood in military rows of leather-bound law books no one had opened in years. Judges don't read law anymore. They quote it. I dusted the frames like always, a family smiling in heavy oak, diplomas aligned like medals, a gavel polished more often than it was used. Nothing unusual. Nothing alive. But when I reached the desk, something whispered otherwise. The bottom drawer didn't slide the way it usually did. It stuck halfway, caught on something more than paper. I pulled harder, the sound sharp in the muffled room. That's when I saw it, an envelope wedged against the back panel, the corner yellowed with age, my name printed across it in letters that shook as if written in a storm. Mason Holt. My name. The mop handle clattered to the floor, and for once I didn't care about noise. My hands hovered above the envelope, like it might burn through skin. Nobody knew my name here. To most I was, "Hey, janitor," or "You missed a spot." Even the payroll system mangled it sometimes. And yet here it was, pressed into paper that looked older than the desk itself. I broke the seal. Inside was a letter, 3 pages, ink faded but legible. The first line stopped my breath. If you are reading this, it means the family I built has already tried to erase me. And you, Mason, are the one they never wanted to exist. The handwriting wasn't random. I recognized it from news clippings, magazine features, framed charity banquets that hung in the courthouse lobby. Bold, looping strokes. Calder Holt. Billionaire industrialist. Founder of Holt Dominion. Dead 5 years. My father. The words bled into me like poison. I read them all the same. He wrote about enemies that weren't competitors but kin. About a death that wouldn't be listed as murder but as complications. About an empire as rotten as the foundation it stood on. He warned me not to trust the ones who bore my blood publicly, but had spent their lives keeping mine hidden. Then came the hook, the sentence that turned my insides cold. I left you proof. They'll come for it. They'll come for you. The only question is whether you'll stay invisible or step into the fire they built in my name. At the bottom of the envelope lay more than paper. A key, old brass, teeth worn but sharp. And a Polaroid photo, grainy, blurred around the edges. It showed a steel cabinet, dented, painted green, with numbers chalked faintly on the door. 314. I sat in that chair, the judge's pen still rolling slowly on its holder, and felt my life split down the middle. Before, I was a man with a mop and a quiet back. After, I was a man with a father I'd never met and a death I couldn't unlearn. For years I'd trained myself to see without being seen. Now I understood why. The invisibility hadn't been an accident. It had been a preparation. The clock ticked toward 4. Somewhere below, a guard's radio crackled. I slid the envelope back into my pocket, locked the drawer, and stood. The room looked the same as when I'd entered, but it wasn't. Neither was I. By the time I left the building, the night air pressed colder, sharper, as if the city itself had caught my secret and didn't approve. Invisible men don't get letters. Invisible men don't get warned. But I had. And something told me I'd just stepped into a war that began long before I was born. The letter didn't let me sleep. I carried it home folded in my jacket, my chest buzzing like a live wire. Every word clung to me, not just as sentences, but as accusations. My father had written to me, while I'd been mopping floors and pretending life was safe or small. I laid it on the kitchen table, under the one bulb that still worked. The paper trembled like it wanted to speak even without me touching it. I read again, slower this time, as if pacing through a minefield. If you are reading this, Mason, I am already dead. Do not believe the obituary. My heart may stop, but not from time or nature. My blood will betray me. You are my only shadow, and they will come for shadows when the light is gone. The handwriting dipped in places, as though his hand had trembled. Or maybe it was me, seeing what I wanted. Then came details. Numbers. Names. He wrote of boardrooms where family was weapon and inheritance a leash. Of contracts signed in whispers, empires exchanged in handshakes that bled. He described my half-brothers, my stepmother, not as people but as predators. They do not share. They consume. They will not allow you to exist once they know you can claim a seat at the table. I should have laughed. I should have torn the letter in half and told myself it was some cruel prank. But the key on the table stared back at me, brass teeth shining like it wanted to bite. And the Polaroid, the dented cabinet numbered 314, was too specific for fantasy. Proof, he'd promised. He'd hidden something. I'd grown up on scraps of rumor. My mother never spoke of him. Calder Holt was a name I only glimpsed in newspapers, his face a monument on magazine covers. To me, he was always two-dimensional, an icon drawn in ink. But here he was in my kitchen, bleeding through the pages, calling me son. And worse, he sounded afraid. The more I read, the more I realized this wasn't just legacy. It was confession. He listed transactions that never hit headlines. Payouts that looked like charity but were bribes. Shipments marked as steel but weighted in blood. And over, one phrase scratched at me. Trust no heir who bears my name. I poured whiskey into a chipped glass and watched it wobble in my hand. I'd never had the luxury of believing in fathers. Now I was supposed to believe mine had reached out from the grave to warn me of murder? But I did believe. Not because I wanted to, but because the silence between the words rang too true. I thought back to his empire, Holt Dominion. Steel, oil, real estate. My half-siblings lived inside mansions, every photo of them lacquered in privilege. Me? I was a ghost in the courthouse. No one knew I carried the same blood. And maybe that had kept me alive this long. Still, something changed when I read the last paragraph. If they find you, they will offer you safety. Do not take it. If they offer you silence, do not buy it. If you run, you will spend your life hunted. If you fight, you must not fight alone. I stared at those words until my eyes burned. Not fight alone. Easy for him to write. Harder for a man like me, who had spent decades perfecting invisibility, to believe. Outside, dawn cracked pale over the skyline. The courthouse would open again soon, full of people who didn't know me and didn't care to. But now, the shadows stretched differently. My life wasn't just mine anymore. It had been written into someone else's story before I was old enough to read it. I folded the letter, slid the key into my pocket, and stared at the Polaroid again. Cabinet 314. Somewhere out there, a dead man's ghost was waiting for me to unlock the truth. And I knew deep down that once I opened that door, there'd be no going back. The first time I felt them watching, it wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. You don't clean a courthouse for years without learning how shadows move. People think silence is absence, but silence has a sound, too sharp, too neat, like glass wiped clean. 3 nights after I found the letter, I walked home under the same broken streetlights that always hummed like dying bees. My boots slapped pavement in rhythm, steady, unbothered. But the echo that followed wasn't mine. Half a beat too late, half a weight too heavy. Someone else was keeping time. I didn't turn. I adjusted pace. Fast. Slow. Stopped to light a cigarette I didn't smoke. The echo matched, clumsy at first, then smoother. I knew then, whoever they were learning me like a song. By the time I reached my building, my chest burned. Not from fear. Fear is hot, noisy. This was cold. Precise. The kind of chill that says you've just stepped onto the board of someone else's game. The next day, the courthouse wasn't safe anymore. My locker had been opened, not forced, not pried. Opened. Everything sat in its place except the envelope. Not taken, not touched. Just gone. I tore through the shelves until my knuckles went white. Then I saw it, folded back into my work shirt pocket, as if reminding me, we can reach you anytime we want. That night, I found my door ajar when I came home. The lock unbroken, the chain hanging limp. Inside, nothing stolen. But the letter was waiting for me on the kitchen table, perfectly centered, pages spread wide like an exhibit. The message was clear. They knew. I sat in the dark with a knife in my lap, waiting. Hours passed. No one came. But the silence pressed heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. 2 days later, it escalated. A coworker, Henry, quiet man with a limp, never bothered anyone, didn't show up for his shift. His cart sat abandoned in the hallway, mop water still rippling as if he'd walked away mid-stroke. By morning, the news called it a medical emergency. But I knew better. Henry had been near the judge's chambers the same night I found the envelope. He must have seen something. And now he was gone. I stopped pretending after that. Stopped thinking invisibility would protect me. Invisibility had kept me alive, yes, but now it made me the perfect target, someone nobody would miss. So I started small, changed routes home, carried the key in my boot instead of my pocket, sat in diners where mirrors lined the walls so I could watch who entered. People noticed less than I feared. To them, I was still the janitor, same bent shoulders, same bleach-stained hands. But at night, alone, I replayed the letter in my head. If you fight, you must not fight alone. The words rattled me more than the threats. Who the hell could I trust? My father's empire had teeth sharper than any stranger's. Blood was the weapon. Family the poison. The city pressed against my windows, restless and electric. Somewhere out there was Cabinet 314. Somewhere out there was proof. And somewhere out there were people who wanted me dead before I found it. The war had already begun. I just hadn't decided if I'd fight it in the light, or in the dark where I'd lived all my life. The first time I felt them watching, it wasn't paranoia. It was instinct. You don't clean a courthouse for years without learning how shadows move. People think silence is absence, But silence has a sound, too sharp, too neat, like glass wiped clean. 3 nights after I found the letter, I walked home under the same broken streetlights that always hummed like dying bees. My boots slapped pavement in rhythm, steady, unbothered. But the echo that followed wasn't mine. Half a beat too late, half a weight too heavy. Someone else was keeping time. I didn't turn. I adjusted pace. Fast. Slow. Stopped to light a cigarette I didn't smoke. The echo matched, clumsy at first, then smoother. I knew then, whoever they were learning me like a song. By the time I reached my building, my chest burned. Not from fear. Fear is hot, noisy. This was cold. Precise. The kind of chill that says you've just stepped onto the board of someone else's game. The next day, the courthouse wasn't safe anymore. My locker had been opened, not forced, not pried. Opened. Everything sat in its place except the envelope. Not taken, not touched. Just gone. I tore through the shelves until my knuckles went white. Then I saw it, folded back into my work shirt pocket, as if reminding me, we can reach you anytime we want. That night, I found my door ajar when I came home. The lock unbroken, the chain hanging limp. Inside, nothing stolen. But the letter was waiting for me on the kitchen table, perfectly centered, pages spread wide like an exhibit. The message was clear. They knew. I sat in the dark with a knife in my lap, waiting. Hours passed. No one came. But the silence pressed heavier, like the walls were holding their breath. 2 days later, it escalated. A coworker, Henry, quiet man with a limp, never bothered anyone, didn't show up for his shift. His cart sat abandoned in the hallway, mop water still rippling as if he'd walked away mid-stroke. By morning, the news called it a medical emergency. But I knew better. Henry had been near the judge's chambers the same night I found the envelope. He must have seen something. And now he was gone. I stopped pretending after that. Stopped thinking invisibility would protect me. Invisibility had kept me alive, yes, but now it made me the perfect target, someone nobody would miss. So I started small, changed routes home, carried the key in my boot instead of my pocket, sat in diners where mirrors lined the walls so I could watch who entered. People noticed less than I feared. To them, I was still the janitor, same bent shoulders, same bleach-stained hands. But at night, alone, I replayed the letter in my head. If you fight, you must not fight alone. The words rattled me more than the threats. Who the hell could I trust? My father's empire had teeth sharper than any stranger's. Blood was the weapon. Family the poison. The city pressed against my windows, restless and electric. Somewhere out there was Cabinet 314. Somewhere out there was proof. And somewhere out there were people who wanted me dead before I found it. The war had already begun. I just hadn't decided if I'd fight it in the light, or in the dark where I'd lived all my life. The courthouse had always been a cage full of predators and ties, but my father's letter forced me to admit something worse. I couldn't outlast this war alone. Calder Holt had written it plain, do not fight alone. For a man who'd built his whole life on invisibility, that was the hardest command of all. The first ally came looking for me. Dana Quinn. Lawyer with a reputation for slicing boardrooms open like cadavers. Mid-40s, calm voice, eyes that had seen enough blood to stop blinking at it. She'd worked for Holt Dominion in its golden days, back when Calder still breathed. I'd seen her around the courthouse before, always walking like a woman who knew what it cost to lose and refused to pay again. She caught me one night on the 3rd floor, mop in hand. "You're Holt's kid," she said. Not a question. A verdict. The mop handle went slick in my grip. "Don't bother denying it," she added, eyes drilling into mine. "The resemblance is there if you know where to look. And trust me, I know where to look. She handed me a card. No logo. Just a number scrawled in ink. When you're ready to stop scrubbing marble and start cutting throats, call me. Then she was gone, heels clicking like a countdown. The second ally wasn't polished like her. He was a janitor like me. Martin Reyes, gray beard, crooked back, 30 years of pushing the same mop in the same courthouse. Most people thought he was slow, half-deaf, maybe half-dumb. That was his camouflage. Martin missed nothing. He knew which judges hid flasks in desk drawers, which lawyers liked to plant evidence, which guards smuggled things in chains that weren't standard issue. I'd caught him watching me one night, eyes sharper than I'd ever seen them before. You found it, didn't you? He asked, voice low, broom leaning like a crutch. I froze. The letter, he whispered. Calder's insurance policy. I saw him slip that envelope into the judge's desk years ago. I didn't think anyone would ever pull it back out. Guess I was wrong. Martin wasn't asking for money, wasn't asking for favors. He just grunted, spat into the mop sink, and said, They think we're furniture. That's our advantage. Use it. The third ally was the one I doubted most, but needed anyway. Detective Monroe. Everyone in the courthouse knew his name, whispered like a curse. Once he'd been a rising star, chasing corruption too close to hold dominion. Then he vanished into desk duty, smothered under administrative reassignment. I found him in a diner booth, steam curling off a chipped mug of coffee. He didn't look up when I slid across from him. You're late, he muttered. You expected me? He finally met my eyes. The look was weary, but not surprised. Your father knew they'd come after you. He left me pieces. Files I wasn't supposed to keep. But I did. Trouble is, pieces don't mean much without someone to put them together. You're offering to help? Monroe shook his head. I'm offering to stand in the fire with you. Help is too clean a word. 3 unlikely names. A lawyer with old debts. A janitor who saw everything. A detective buried alive by the same family I was born to. Not friends. Not saints. Just shadows like me. And maybe, just maybe, shadows were the only thing strong enough to survive the Holt Empire's light. I grew up believing silence was natural. My mother never spoke his name. When I asked about my father, she'd smile in that brittle way of hers and say, Some men belong to the world, not to us. You and I, we survive by being small. Back then, I thought it was philosophy. Now I know it was survival. There were signs I never questioned as a boy. Envelopes of cash slipped under the door when the rent was late. A winter coat my mother swore she could never afford. Money transfers that appeared once a year, always the same amount, always untraceable. I thought they were miracles. They were breadcrumbs. My father's way of feeding us without ever letting us near the table. Why didn't he come himself? Because Calder Holt couldn't. In his world, admitting to a son born outside the family's polished marriage would have been a declaration of war. His empire wasn't just steel and glass. It was image, dynasty, bloodlines that had to look pure even if they were rotting underneath. I was his secret card, hidden in the shadows until he decided the game was ready. But death arrived before he could play me. Why didn't they erase me earlier? That question haunted me until the pieces fell into place. They knew about me, yes, but knowing isn't proof. To the family I was a rumor, a whisper, an inconvenience not worth the scandal. And as a child, I had no legal power. No signature. No claim. Killing a boy with nothing would only invite suspicion. Safer to leave me in the dark, a ghost who swept floors and meant nothing. But Calder knew there would come a time when nothing became leverage. That was the purpose of the letter. He had seen his own end coming, not the heart attack printed in the papers, but the knife hidden in it. Before it struck, he left a confession, proof, and instructions. He couldn't trust his family, and he couldn't trust banks or lawyers. So he trusted one man, a judge he had once saved from ruin. That judge hid the envelope in his desk, the one I'd later dust 1,000 times without knowing what slept inside it. It wasn't chance I found it. It was design. Calder had gambled on my invisibility, that one day the janitor no one noticed would open the drawer no one else touched. And now, years later, the silence ended. I understood everything in a flash that made my skin crawl. Why I never knew my father. Why they let me live all these years. Why the letter waited in the dark until I was old enough to read it. My mother had been right. We survived by being small, but Calder hadn't raised me to stay that way. He had hidden me until the day came when his empire needed me, or feared me most. Now that day had arrived. And blood, I realized, doesn't forget. It only waits. The night we went for Cabinet 314, I finally understood what my father meant when he wrote, "Don't fight alone." The storage facility sat on the edge of the city, wrapped in silence and rust. The hall smelled of old paint and coal dust. Martin took the door, leaning on his mop handle like it had been carved into a spear. Dana kept the flashlight steady, her jaw tight, eyes scanning for threats. Monroe led us down the corridor, with the key clutched in his fist like a trigger. Cabinet 314 was waiting. The numbers chalked across its dented metal face matched the Polaroid exactly. My chest rattled with each heartbeat. Monroe slid the key into the lock. It turned with a soft metallic click, like a vault giving up a secret it had guarded too long. The door creaked open. Inside was the steel box, heavy, green paint peeling. Dana dropped to her knees, pried at the latch, and with one sharp pull the lid came free. Folders, ledgers, photographs, proof. I reached in, trembling, but Monroe caught my wrist. "Not so fast," he muttered. He slipped a small camera from his coat and began photographing every page. "We make copies first. If they catch you, they can't bury the truth." Martin whistled low. "That's smart. But copies won't stop bullets." He shifted, and I saw the handle of a pistol tucked inside his ragged jacket. For 30 years he'd been invisible, the courthouse's ghost. Tonight he wasn't a ghost, he was a guard. Dana scanned the pages, eyes flashing as she read. These contracts, half the empire's built on fraud. Kickbacks, fake shipments, offshore accounts. If we drop this in court, they're finished. My throat tightened. If we drop it? She looked at me hard. It's your choice, Mason. Your blood. Your war. We'll stand with you, but you have to decide how to fight. I pressed my hands against the papers. They were cold, sharp-edged. My father's voice echoed inside me, proof. And for the first time, I knew I wasn't holding this alone. We didn't go to the family empty-handed. We went armed with each other. The boardroom sat like a throne above the city, glass walls shining with money and arrogance. Serena, Julian, and the rest of them waited at the long table, polished and smiling, already certain they had me cornered. "Sign the merger," Serena said sweetly. "We'll take care of you. Comfortable. Quiet." I didn't answer. Dana stepped forward, laid a folder on the table, and flipped it open. "Fraud. Bribes. Shell companies. I've already drafted the motions. Every court in this city will see it within the hour." Julian went pale. "You're bluffing." Martin snorted from the corner, his mop handle now a cane, his pistol hidden at his side. "Try us." Monroe pulled out his phone, thumb hovering over the screen. "I've got every file copied, encrypted, and waiting. One press, and half the reporters in the city will get an early breakfast they won't forget." The room cracked. Masks slipped. Serena's smile died on her lips. Julian's hands trembled. They looked at me now, not like a mistake, not like an inconvenience. Like the one man standing between them and ruin. I leaned forward steady. My father hid me in the dark so I could survive. But I'm done being invisible. You don't own me. You don't own this city. And starting today, you don't own Holt Dominion. Silence fell, heavy as stone. Then Monroe's thumb pressed send. Phones buzzed across the city. Dana's papers landed in judges' inboxes. Martin blocked the only exit with his crooked back and quiet resolve. By dawn, headlines screamed. Stock markets bled red. The Holt name, once polished into gold, cracked open to show the rot beneath. I walked out of that glass tower with nothing in my hands but everything my father had denied me. Not wealth. Not empire. Something better. My own name. And for the first time, I carried it without shame.